Hi everyone, welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast. This time we're joined by Kevin Slavin. Kevin, how are you?
Doing good, thank you.
New York City, one of my favorite cities in the world. How's it going over there?
It's good. It's good. It's roaring back to life, which is I am happy to see. I should say doing so in a pretty responsible way, all things relative. So yeah.
Now, let's, because actually on that point, like New York City is a buzzing metropolis, and it was hard, actually, when the first pandemic hit, it was hard to get my head around everyone going inside. Of all the cities in the world, that was the
Yeah.
one that I went, whoa.
Yeah. It actually it was the first visible case was about 60 feet from our house here in the Bronx.
Oh, wow.
It was around before that, but the first time that it was known was somebody dropped off their child about 60 feet from here and was not well, and that's when we knew.
Was it an eerie sensation for you? I know this wasn't the topic of conversation, but you have seen pictures from New York and the streets are like doomsday empty.
Um, yeah, I mean, to be honest, from a personal point of view, we didn't for the majority of the worst days and months of the pandemic. We hardly left the house. So the empty streets of Manhattan were as abstract for me as they were for you.
Okay.
Um, uh, we knew that they were no further away than they'd ever been, but they might as well have been halfway around the world.
Now, this has been a super uplifting start to the podcast, I feel. I think
Yep,
everyone's
yep.
really happy.
But
I think
yeah,
I think we're back in lockdown, so it's at the
yeah,
forefront of our minds a bit. So yeah.
Yeah.
we could reboot.
No,
I don't know.
we don't
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to. We don't need to. This is part of the podcast. Talk to us about, you've been studying. We talk about like AI and technology being able to study like the smallest minutia of the world, that like things that humans
Yeah,
couldn't possibly do. You've taken it
yeah,
to the extreme.
yeah, yeah. I think starting maybe 15 years ago, I was looking at the places where it wasn't where the role of machine learning and automation and so on weren't totally obvious to everybody yet, which at that time was things like the market, and realizing that the kinds of that the notion of what we thought the stock market was, which was a bunch of people yelling at each other in a room at that time, had been very quietly replaced by billions of tiny bots fighting with each other. And back then, I was very interested in those, in the sort of the minutiae of these things that formed the kind of financial ecosystem that have now fully taken it over, frankly, and tracked that for many years. But I would say somewhere around 6 or 7 years ago, I started asking different kind of question around the places where machine learning and analysis can go, and that has been it's been quite a journey. Um, I think for me, part of my background was very early work in what is now a very mature industry of location-based services, of the figuring out how can technology help us identify exactly where we are. How does our phone know exactly where we are? What can you do with that, and so on and so forth. Um, the question that I started asking about 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago now, was, is there a way to figure out where we are, not using technology per se, but biology? Is there a in the same way that where I am and where you are has a signature from a satellite's perspective? Do we have biological signatures for where we are? That was the question that I started asking. And at that time, really knew very little about not only what the answer would be, but also really in a meaningful way, how to even ask that question in a way that could lead to an answer. And a lot of what I've done over the years since then has been to kind of chase that question in various ways. One way to
I was gonna say, what does
think
that
about it.
mean? What does that mean? What's a
Yeah.
biological signal?
Yeah. So one way to think about it is that if you were to look at the DNA of the three of us here, and you were to sort of compare them side by side, it's basically the same. There's just there's a few differences, and they account for some substantial things, but it's basically the same. But by contrast, if I were to look at all of the organisms in your gut and my gut, and we were to look at a list and in a table of my gut biome versus your gut biome versus your gut biome, those would be super distinct. Those would be far more distinct from one another than our DNA itself. And this notion, because all those organisms in our gut, they're as much of who we are as our DNA in some very real ways. They affect our outcomes the same way DNA does. They reproduce. They unlike our DNA, they will shift over time in response to certain input changes. But fundamentally, they're distinct. And the question I had was, okay, if my gut biome is different than your gut biome and your gut biome, does New York City have a gut biome? In the same way, does Lagos have a gut biome? Does Tokyo have a gut biome? And if New York City has a gut biome, is it different on the east side of Manhattan from the west side of Manhattan? Is it different in Brooklyn than in Queens? Is it different on my side of the street from my neighbor's side of the street? What is sort of the resolution, in a way, of an environmental microbiome? It was myself and a bunch of collaborators at the MIT Media Lab, some research assistants, and some collaborators far beyond that. And we started asking this question: is there such a thing as an urban microbiome, in the same way that we have gut microbiomes? And that turned into a very interesting set of questions, not just around biology, but also around the role of computation in being able to address biology. I think one of the things that we know instinctively, but I don't think it's in a way properly marked, is this: there's a massive shift that happened very quietly, in a way, which is that biology was fundamentally experiential for most of the history of the discipline of biology. It was basically inventing tools like the microscope to be able to see what was happening. And quietly, over couple decades now, that has been replaced by a fundamentally computational approach of basically saying, okay, whatever it is made out of DNA, and our engagement with DNA is a fundamentally computational technique. And this has such profound implications that I think are not well understood. We all know, okay, the human genome was basically sequenced 20 years ago. And I think it was like 18 years ago, they were able to say, okay, we have one person who's fully sequenced. And maybe, I think it was like 8 years later that they said we have 1,000 people who are fully sequenced. And you can spit in a jar and send it to a company, and they'll tell you, how much Neanderthal you've got, or what have you. I think all that is well known at this point, obviously. But for me, the question is, well, what about the rest of life on Earth? And what does a computational approach to biology for all the other species on Earth, in particular, all the ones that are invisible? What do we learn from that, and how can we learn from that? And if we could use machines to get at the truth and the underlying reality of what's underneath for all these other species on Earth, how does it change not just what we understand in particular relative to science, but also just our worldview? Does it change how we imagine our role on the planet? These are the big questions that I think are only kind of emerging now.
All right, here comes the question, right? So if you studied me, you'd find out I like chicken burgers and coffee and lots of gin, and I'm probably very Neanderthal. But that doesn't really give an answer that's surprising. When you started out doing all of this, what were you trying to solve? Like, what was because you can apply an algorithm to anything, but eventually there's some kind of outcome. And just to go, well, I just wanted to understand how humans fit into the world.
Yep.
Is kind of like that's the art school side of the room.
Example of
a
machine.
Like the arts people are going, I just want to know. But the scientist is going to achieve what?
Yeah. So worth noting, the art school side of the room, that's the side of the room I'm from.
Really?
Really.
Me too.
I have. No. I studied design and sculpture. That's my degree.
Yeah.
So it is actually it is an artist question, but it is also a scientist question. There's this I forget who said it now, that all science is either physics or stamp collecting, and this is definitely the stamp collecting of science, right? This is basically just like what is it? But when you're talking about the microbial world, I mean, we know so little about it. We know so little about it. And, as the pandemic reminds us, it matters, right? Like, we only pay attention to the vast empire of life that's invisible to us when it, frankly, when it kills us. But the entire rest of the time and the entire rest of this vast invisible empire is basically also what keeps us alive. It's also what keeps us healthy. It's what helps us fight all these other things that are out there. And they're what make us us. For me, it was really the inquiry of just, what is it? What is the, it was more like, it had the quality of like just we're exploring some unknown territory, and let's just see what we can find there. And what I learned, and again, this was early days of it, about 8 years ago, is that there were a bunch of people coming from the other side of the room, the hardcore scientist side of the room, who were asking broadly the same questions with a little bit more authority, but asking basically the same questions, which is, what is it? What is it around us? What is it inside us? And I think one way to think about it is if it was any other planet, we would think, oh yeah, that's exactly what we should do. We should try to classify all the life on that planet if we can find it. Well, it's our planet, and we don't even have names for almost half of what we find these days. In the invisible part of the spectrum here.
It's so weird. It's so weird. It's because it's like, you're right? So when I first started thinking through this, I was like, who cares about the small little things? But then when you break it down to go like, this is our planet, and we've had Max Tegmark before explain it, that it's a spaceship. We're actually on a spaceship. And it's like, what are the particles in the spaceship? Could it hurt us? Is it good for us? Can we evolve from it? What does it tell? How do we learn? These are pretty important questions.
Yeah. And also, any one of them can have any one of them, but more commonly, a bunch of them in combination has, vast, meaningful consequences. Putting aside, pathogens, it has consequences. If you have food allergies, there are many frameworks for understanding autism as a function of a shift in the microbiome of people who are struggling or coping with autism. These are understanding depression as a fundamental function of certain microbiological imbalances. And, we don't understand these things because we've always thought of human well-being and health as a function of just sort of, there's an essentially healthy person, and maybe something, like a single pathogen is introduced and suddenly the whole thing is broken. But the truth is that it determines, our so many of the sort of fundamental, the fabric of well-being in ways that are much more subtle and important. And understanding that it's not just that we're on a spaceship, we are spaceships, and there are, 10,000 passengers in your gut that are counting on you to keep going. And to keep them healthy, which you do or not. Sometimes you take an antibiotic and you wipe them all out, and then it will repopulate with who knows what. And these are, I think just having as a framework the notion that we aren't individuals in the way that we conventionally think of ourselves as individuals. We are, we are colonies that have a skeleton and a brain and some muscle moving around them. I think if we can reframe the way that we think about this, we can start to change how we think about just human health and in general.
How evolved are we? How evolved are we with this thinking? Because you go like give us an example. You go like, okay, it's this simple, and before we get to the obvious one, which is the pandemic, but you go like air quality. You can even go through things like, people that suffer from asthma and potentially like longevity and quality of life and food sources and cancers and all these sort of things. Is that the realm of what we're talking about?
Sure. I mean, think about, you will have strongly positive outcomes if you eat more fermented food, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that's kimchi or pickles or what have you. And the reason for that is because you're getting live microbes into your body that are very positive, and that help keep you thriving. There are some diseases. There's a disease called C. diff, is the short name for it, C. difficile. This is it's a pathogen that it's not necessarily deadly, but it's not great. You don't want it, and it's found frequently in hospitals, and it is opportunistic for people who have diminished immune response, which are typically people in a hospital. And if you catch C. diff in the hospital, it's powerfully antibiotic resistant. And the problem with something that's antibiotic resistant is that not only is it not going to get killed by the antibiotic, but when you take the antibiotic, that's going to wipe out everything that you need in your gut to fight it. And so before you discover that it's antibiotic resistant, you're also wiping out all the allies that you had in there. So C. difficile was thought to be a pretty kind of a lost cause, and then they started. We're just gonna talk about it. They started. We're just gonna talk about poop for the next little bit.
Perfect. That's good.
Right, because I hope I think it's probably, this will probably be the only episode where we're talking about poop.
We could do a repeat if people really like it.
Hope not.
So it turns out that the only way to effectively treat C. diff when it happens is through what's called an FMT, a fecal matter transplant, which is basically
A fecal
taking
matter
poop.
transplant.
What's that?
A what? A fecal.
Fecal matter transplant. That's the polite term for a
Eating
poop
shit.
transplant. Basically, taking poop from a healthy person and transplanting it into the gut of somebody who needs a healthier gut.
What's that? Happy Gilmore? I eat pieces of shit like you for breakfast. You eat shit for breakfast? Yes, because I'm eating it to stop those super meta things.
I think you'll be relieved to hear that it's not an edible.
Damn.
It's actually
So literal.
Well, how do they put it in there?
It's actually a medical procedure where it's transplanted. I know it's early in the morning there, so you're kind of breakfast minded.
We're just gonna hide this.
Put your mind at ease.
I'm just gonna hide this.
If nothing else, I let this be the part where you can really relax. Right?
I'm just gonna hide this poo in your chicken. You'll never know.
No one is recommending
eating poo.
This is let me be very clear for the podcast. Do not
eat poo. Okay, well, you got it. Not a good idea. Not good for
a healthy person.
Or has it been done, and have you studied the outcomes? Because this is the art student now.
Not personally. Not personally. But
good to know.
But I will say that for the people who have had it done medically, that it has a very high level of success in treating C. diff.
Wow.
Which is to say that the best way to address the presence of a pretty deadly pathogen in your gut is to bring in a colony of friendly fighters. Now, here's one of the interesting.
Can I just ask, how does it get in there then?
That's a different episode. That's a little.
So you don't eat it, but it magically gets into your body. All right, keep going.
But you can pretty much. It's whatever you're imagining right now. It's pretty much that.
Pretty right.
Yep.
Okay.
But one of the interesting things was I have to. Sorry, actually, I need to look it up because I'm going to get
fire with fire. I'm still thinking about how it gets in there. Hold on. How's it get in there? I still don't know. You guys think about it.
I'm going to look.
I'll talk to you about it later.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll finish and I'll still be going, I don't understand how it gets in there.
Let it go.
Well, so one of the interesting sort of footnotes that came out of using FMTs, fecal matter transplants for C. diff, was that one of the subjects who was being treated for C. diff, also totally nothing to do with C. diff, also had alopecia, which is where you lose all your hair, like your eyebrows, everything, right? Just lose all your hair, which is it's okay. It's a thing that happens to people. Nobody knows exactly why. Nobody knows how to treat it. You live with it. It is what it is. So there was a person who had alopecia, and then they got C. diff, and then they got an FMT, and all their hair grew back.
Oh wow!
And it turns, so we still don't know exactly what alopecia is, but it has something to do with some interaction between a couple of microbes in your gut. Now we know that, right?
Wow.
And and this is so for me, the kind of hubris, the nerve to try to explore other planets, when we just have so little idea of what is happening right here, is incredible.
Dave
right?
I know, I don't get why we want to go to Mars. I don't get it. There's so much fun to have here.
Yeah, no, there's not.
There's
not
a
lot.
I mean, we could eat crap and discover so many cures to so many things. It's just such a huge opportunity. Why go to Mars? You're not going to learn that on Mars.
No, you're not. No, it's true. The lore of Mars is lost on me, but I seem to be in the minority on that. I don't know.
So, all right. So then let's go forward now. Let's go to studying. Apparently, if you were having a dinner party, You probably wouldn't
Yeah.
tell the story about the FMT. I would have thought.
Not till coffee.
Not at the start. Maybe after a couple of
No,
minutes.
that's like halfway through.
Halfway through. But you probably maybe you went from being like the arts person at the table, and they're going kind of like, well, I study like microbial little things in the air. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to the pandemic, and all of a sudden people are going, you do what?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's so when we started working on this, whatever it was, like 7 years ago or so. The first thing that I discovered is that we weren't the only people working on this. That there were at least 3 other labs that we found that were asking basically the same question. So Chris Mason at the Weill Cornell Center for Computational Genomics in New York was also asking this question. Is there? Actually, his question was more specific. He was asking, is there a gut biome to the New York City subway? Is one station distinct from another station, and if so, how? And so he was sequencing the microbiome at every single subway station in New York City at that time, which has now turned into a much broader global inquiry. So he was doing that. Jessica Green at the University of Oregon at that time had a really brilliant idea to study the microbes that were moving through buildings by basically pulling the filters on HVAC systems, on heating, ventilation, air conditioning. If you think about what that filter is doing, the good part is that it's basically filtering out all the microbes so that you get good fresh air. But from a microbiologist perspective, that's like this awesome fishing net of microbes, and you sequence everything that you find in there. And so she could track the ways that microbes were moving through buildings. And then Eric Alm's lab, also at MIT, to bring the conversation back to poop, was doing wastewater testing to basically see what could you core the sewage and sequence what you find there to see what's moving through a city, which had even 7 or 8 years ago had obvious epidemiological questions that it asked. But I would say that our lab and those 3 labs and also probably a bunch of others, we were all doing this, and broadly speaking, nobody cared. Everybody would just ask why on earth it would ever be valuable to be able to detect all the microbes around you. And then one of those microbes turned into, a gangster, basically. And then it became quite relevant. The shift in the pandemic was realizing that it is very valuable to know what microbes are around you, especially if you're looking for 1 or 2 in particular, which is very much what we are doing these days. And there has been a sudden interest in not just the techniques, but also just the real question that all of us were asking back then, which is what is around us? And it turns out to be very valuable in the immediate term. But I think it's also opening up the question to a lot of people to say, like, okay, if you could detect the pathogens, what else could you detect while you're there? And I think this is, I think as in some parts of the world, which, and it's quite unevenly distributed, but in parts of the world that can actually kind of like catch their breath a little bit relative to the fear around that specific pathogen, they are starting to ask questions of, while we're looking for that, what else might we find while we're looking? And this, for me, it's the same question we were asking back then, but now I think there's a recognition that that there's value in the answer. So
you're actively tracking are you currently tracking the coronavirus as an example? Is that what you're actively doing?
Yeah. So uh, when COVID was sort of warming up, I was working with a healthcare company, and ended up sort of leading the pandemic task force for this healthcare company, which was building clinics for some of the large corporations in the United States. And it was very early in the pandemic, and it was very hard to get PPE to protect people, including medical staff. And it was very hard very early on to get any kind of meaningful testing, especially testing that you could turn around quickly, or at that time even that was reliable. Um, in that moment, I was trying to think about, okay, how can we get more tests to the doctors? How can we get more PPE to the doctors? How can we figure out how to even keep a clinic open in the moments where it was clear that that medical facilities, were frequently a place where people were getting exposed to COVID. And I called Dr. Jessica Green, who had mentioned earlier, who had done that work with HVAC systems. She had been the one. She had actually been tracking the way that pathogens were moving through hospitals 5 or 6 years prior.
Yep.
And I called her. This was probably in April of 2020, and I said, that work that you were doing with pulling the filters from HVAC and sequencing the stuff that you found there, could you run an assay and see if SARS-CoV-2 is in there, and that way we could see if the virus that causes COVID was in the room. And at that time, when I called her, she said, "Oh yeah, it's so funny that you called. We just tried it yesterday with a synthetic version of the virus, and we're getting a live version of the virus. And yeah, yes, we can do it." And basically, if you fast forward a year, she has really transformed her company, which is called Phylogen, which is to whom I've been consulting and advising for some time. She has really developed. I would say she has optimized the lab testing and the equipment and the processes to be able to detect the presence of SARS-CoV-2 in a room. And this is it's obscenely valuable in the sense that if you have 100 people in an office space, you could swab every one of those people's noses, or you could sense the room, and if the room is negative, then that all those people are negative. If the room is positive, well, you might try to narrow it down a little bit further. Is it just this conference room? Well, who was in that conference room, or so on and so forth. But the notion now, Phylogen isn't the only game in town on this. There are other folks who have started moving towards this. Poppy is a startup that's advised by Chris Mason, who is doing the subway work that I mentioned earlier, and there are others. But I think overall, whether it's Phylogen or Poppy or whomever, this notion of being able to detect pathogens and then beyond pathogens in the rooms that we spend 90% of our time in feels a lot. It's a lot. You're lifting. If you can sense pathogens in the rooms that we spend 90% of our time in, it's not the heavy lifting of individually testing every single person in there. And that doesn't just have to be for COVID. That could be for the flu. That could be for the kinds of mold or fungus that cause certain allergies or other negative outcomes or what have you. And I think in general, just broadly speaking, if it was maybe 25 years ago and you walked into an architecture firm and you said, in 5 years, you're going to have people who work directly with architects to figure out exactly how all the computers in here are networked together. And in 15 years, you're going to have to figure out how the Wi-Fi stations are going to be delivering attenuated signals through these walls. They'd look at you like you were crazy because the notion of computation as being in the fabric of society wasn't there yet. So in the same way that would have been unimaginable 25 years ago, I would say now that it will be impossible 5, certainly 10 years from now to think of being in the business of building new spaces without having a biologist on board, without having somebody who's thinking entirely about what is going to be the effect of these kinds of materials, this kinds of air circulation, this kinds of density of people in terms of fundamental human health and well-being. And because that is turning into a discernible and defined science through computation.
This is blowing my mind because, I mean, aside from, we both worked for this company, HP, ages ago. But did you ever work at Rhodes out of there? It used to be it used to be a paint factory. And I swear people were getting headaches all the time.
Yeah, they were.
And it smelled, and it was like, I just thought it was the job.
Lord knows what we've got.
Yeah, but then, okay, did that happen to you as well?
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
that's weird. So yeah, that makes sense in the future. Now, but I want to go back to this COVID thing for a sec though.
Mm-hmm.
Does that assume then that the virus, because this is me being really dumb, it's airborne and it can exist in the particles in the air, therefore the air filter can pick it up?
So there's different ways to do it. So the way that Phylogen's doing it right now is the way to imagine it is that if there's an infectious carrier, right, which is really what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right? You're looking for a person who is exhaling the virus, and when they do that, it's airborne and then it settles, and so it'll settle on their desk. It might settle on their hands, and then they touch the door handle, and so on and so forth. Now, it's easy to jump from that to thinking, and that's why you don't touch anything, and that's why we have to. What do we have to do here? We had to sing "Happy Birthday" while we washed our hands. It was like it made no sense, but we were trained to think of surfaces as dangerous because that's where the virus was. It is where the virus is, but not in such sufficiently high quantity to be as afraid of it as we were sort of trained to be, at least here in the United States. That's called fomite transmission, and it's pretty rare. It's not that it never happens, but it's not the problem. However, there are traces of it, and those traces will endure in terms of their genetic signature. So the virus doesn't live very long once it leaves you, which is one reason that the pandemic isn't worse than it is. It has a very short shelf life, but its genetic signature is still there, even if it's dead. And so that means that you could come in and you could swab the desk where people are sitting, and if they were exhaling the virus onto the desk, which they would do if they were infectious, you'll pick it up on the swab. And we take that swab, we send that back to the lab. They extract the genetic material from it, and then they're just looking for one very specific genetic signature, which is that of the pathogen. So that's one way to do it, which is basically physically swabbing surfaces within an office or home or what have you. It is also possible to do it through air intake, which Poppy is doing, which they're a little bit quieter about some of the specifics of it, which is fine. But fundamentally, it's basically pulling microbes into an air sensor, and then fundamentally the same thing. Just saying, okay, we now have it. We send it back to the lab. Let's check it. And see if this particular pathogen is present.
So I've got a question for you then. We don't have that many cases in Australia, thankfully, because we live on an island. We got sent here a few hundred years ago because we were bad people. But aside from obviously our previous ancestors who owned the land originally, so being politically correct to them as well. But where was I going with this? The pandemic, the last couple of cases that came out, the government said two things, and I want to understand if it's possible because it was headline news. One was the person caught it through the air filter system, the air conditioning in the hotel. That's case one. Yeah. That happened in Perth. Well, that's what they said happened. Case two was someone else caught it when they both opened the door at the same time.
Not an epidemiologist, not an MD.
Yeah.
So that's, strong caveats. But neither of those are impossible. They're not likely. But it is possible. It's a virus. It travels through the air. It doesn't travel that far. It's not, and it's not as durable as we had originally feared. But yeah, if you, if somebody who has it is close enough to breathe on you and you don't have, neither one of you has a mask, that seems like a great way to transmit it, actually. But through the air vents, there are studies that show that. It was definitely true of SARS-1 back in, when was that, 2003 or so?
Okay.
In the analyses after the fact, it was found to have traveled through the vents. It's possible.
I'm now going to ask you about I have a obsession with air filters, various different types. I buy them. I like them. The most recent one gives me real-time analysis as to what's in the air, which I don't really believe, but it still makes me feel pretty good about that I'm seemingly cleaning the air, even though I live in a country that's got pretty clean air. Are these like beneficial? My air filter,
I don't know the answer to that relative to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that caused COVID. It's a good question. I've heard different answers, so that's a strong I don't know from me. Yeah,
I'm still gonna get them in every room.
I'm not gonna. I won't fight you.
Do you have them? Do you have air filters in New York? Do you have like your own little home as a microbiologist?
Well, now we have vaccines, so I don't.
Yeah.
We've got an issue with that.
Here we go though, because this is back to this is what you were saying, right? Because you were going, you're cool. That yogurt, and they're like the happy little antibodies. They go in your stomach and they fight, and you watch it going, yeah, whatever. But it's true, isn't it? It's antibodies. You need to be.
It's a probiotic.
Probiotic, is that what it is? Yeah, probiotic.
Yeah, I think in general, like putting pandemics aside.
Yeah.
It was actually Dr. Jessica Green did work. She did really interesting work back at the University of Oregon years ago. And this is going to be reductive and an oversimplification
I do that all the time. I'm really good at oversimplifying things.
of what was actually a very rigorous study.
Yeah.
But she was studying how microbes move through hospitals, which is an obviously important subject. And what she discovered with rigorous testing, so typically what hospitals do is broadly the same. It's the idea of the air filter. It's just like just get rid of everything. It's the same idea as taking an antibiotic. Like if you don't know what's out there, just get rid of all of it. And so they have, they scrub the floors with one thing, and then they scrub the floors with another thing, and then they clean the windows with it. And the problem with that approach is that what you're basically doing is you're placing evolutionary pressure on everything in there to evolve to become antibiotic resistant. That's basically how we got C. diff, right? The only way to get, really good antibiotic resistant microbes is to just keep wiping them out. Until one of them mutates into something that can't be wiped out. And what she studied was that the that the overall microbial health of a hospital room was improved, N% by the strongest antiseptic measures possible, and it was improved far more by opening the window. That by just opening the window in a hospital room and bringing in fresh air that has everything from the trees and the grass and everything around us, and bringing that into the microbial mix of the room, which then is what populates you, that had more positive outcomes in aggregate than just trying to kill everything all the time. It's like the antiseptic, antibiotic, air filter approach. It's this kind of notion. It's like the thing that I've heard described as, it's as if you use a nuclear. You've got weeds in your garden, so you drop a nuclear bomb and hope that just the roses grow back. And it's like, well, that's not really how it's going to work.
Yeah. It's a good analogy, though. You'll kill everything.
And I mean, in real terms, the architecture of the 20th century was really formed by the last pandemic of 2019. The last pandemic really shaped a lot of ideas about architecture and led to, I don't know what it is in Australia, but in the United States, I can't buy house paint that's not antimicrobial, and that is generally a good thing. It's, it means that there's a lot less mold, a lot less fungus, a lot less likelihood that the flu is going to hang out there, and so on and so on. It's basically good. All the concrete has a pH level that resists microbial growth, and all of that is good. But it's all this notion of like, we just need to make our cities sterile, and that will save us. And it's like, well, actually, what we've done is we have made our cities sterile, and it has made us powerfully vulnerable to the thing that comes in when it comes in, and that's exactly what happened.
So we can become more resistant by fighting. It's sort of like the theory of working out and going to the gym. You're constantly straining to get stronger, and it's the survival of the fittest with Charles Darwin's theory. And if we wipe out everything that will make us, we're walking into a gym and there's nothing to lift.
Right. So, strength comes from diversity, right? Not from just being strong and stronger. From a broad systems biology perspective, you want as many different things in the system as possible. That's what produces the greatest resilience. So in the same way that one of the ways to be really healthy is to take probiotics, is to eat yogurt or anything with live cultures in it, because what you're doing is you're bringing in, this diverse colony of the good guys to fight whoever the bad guys are, or whoever. I don't want to be judgmental about certain microbes. Whoever is, whoever has negative outcomes for human health.
But it's such a good point, because the whole thing is about like AI and technology, and if you take the answers in, and because we had this really great conversation with Trisha Wong, right? And she was like, you've got to understand, you've got to find meaning in the information that you're collecting. And so if you go, this particular pathogen can make you sick. Okay, we've got to wipe that pathogen out. This one can make you sick. This, wipe it out, 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 wipe them all out. And then you go, well, wait a second. The art student goes, hang on a minute. I don't think wiping all these out is possible and also not good for you. That's what you're saying, right? Individually, with all these pieces, it's not going to help.
Meaningful.
Right. I mean, I think, and there's also it's interesting just in the raw computational science of what we're talking about in metagenomics. It has its own biases in a way. Frequently, it has its own biases, although the biases are explicitly acknowledged. So the interesting thing. Let me step back one. The fundamental discipline of metagenomics is saying, if there's genomics where I say like, hey, spit into this jar, and then I'm going to take whatever I find in there from a genetic point of view, and I'm going to compare that to the human genome, which we have mapped out, and I can tell you, I can start to make certain associations of eye color or Neanderthal ancestry or what have you. But if I give you like a bowl of soup and say, what's in there, you don't know what to compare the genetic material that you find in there to, right? You don't know whether it's meat or vegetable or whether it's got spices or whatever. And so metagenomics refers to saying, so metagenomics means sort of finding some sample where you don't know what's in there, and you've got to look it up against everything in the tree of life, against all organisms on Earth, which is there's a lot of them, right? There's really a lot of them, and there's the NCBI database of them, and in a way, like the computational task, which by the way is it's even worse than what I just described, because in the process of extracting the genetic material from that soup, you're also breaking up the DNA into what are called kamers, into like basically tiny little jigsaw pieces. And so the one of the ways to think about the metaphors is it would be like, I'll give you like a couple million jigsaw puzzle pieces. I don't know how many jigsaw different puzzles they're associated with, and I don't know which box covers they are. And also only about 80% of the pieces are there. What can you make from that? And this is the question that metagenomic scientists are asking computers every day. It's difficult. It's difficult, right? And so because the NCBI database of all life on Earth is so enormous, what you have are people who inflect it and sort of curate that and say, like, look, we don't need to know, like, even if it is an animal, we don't need to know if it's an animal. We're only looking for viruses. We're only looking for a certain subset of bacteria that have the following characteristics. And like that, you can make it quasi manageable and just say like, okay, it's still a couple million puzzle pieces, but there's only 16,000 box covers that it could possibly be. But these are still, vast computational tasks. And this is the thing that I think is really, that sort of snuck up on all of us, which is that, it took years and years and years to build the computational power to sequence the human genome. And we did it 20 years ago, but now, with all the acceleration, and it's everything to do with Moore's law, but really a lot of very clever code to be able to just take this much data and say, could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? And that for me is just like of all the things that machine learning can do, this is actually one of the most noble and valuable, and also one of the most complex. It's by a long shot. It's one of the more complex computational tasks that's going on right now. And I think it just this is for me. It has the quality of NASA. Like we are learning everything about our planet, and we're doing that basically using machine learning on top of a little teaspoon from here and an air filter from over here and maybe some poop from this pipe over here. But we are starting to gain a kind of map of the dominion that we've never that we just can't even see. And that's what's interesting to me.
So yeah, you're saying the most powerful use of AI in our generation right now is this study, is this effort of work of understanding these microgenomes of like, my head, how do I, or for anyone listening, what percentage of the entire, you talked about a database and you had most people go, yeah, database about this big, but like we're talking about galaxy size, infinite, like, there's this number of stars and we're really only looking at this star. Is that what we're like 1/trillionth of a blah, blah, blah? Like how?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's something, there are, actually, hold on. Like,
Takes like big data
yeah.
versus big data.
Because I actually, there's a couple of interesting numbers in it. So like, yeah, if you, I was just looking at these earlier today is why I'm looking now. So yeah, okay, yeah, so like, right, okay, so like, yeah, so like 200, so like some of the numbers are like 200 liters of water have 5,000 viruses in them, right? Like just 5,000 discrete viruses, and you've got to look that up against, the entire table of all viruses, most of which, by the way, frequently we've never seen before, right? So like you've got, Craig Venter, is out basically doing this in the ocean and basically hauling up seawater, sequencing everything that he finds there, and is routinely, just very routinely, finding things that are not in the monster manual yet, right? Like they're not, like we don't have a name for them. We don't know what they are. They're obviously essential to life on Earth because they're here, but we don't know what they are. And so part of it is just this notion that it's like, it's not just that it's vast, it's that it's vast and growing. And so it's a very interesting sort of subset within the work. In conventional AI, the biases aren't explicitly acknowledged, right? So it's like we're saying that it's all faces, but really it's really just looking at pretty pale faces because that's what we train the data set on. Nobody thought about it. We just used all the faces that were in the, but here it's very deliberate. It's saying, no, it's not all life. It's just the viruses. It's not all life. It's just the 16S subset, whatever. And thinking about those subsets there's a lot of what's happening in this field that is essentially a kind of curatorial work, which is to say which parts of the tree of life will be interesting for whom, and how can we prune the tasks for the machines such that how can we use that curation to basically prune the magnitude of the task ahead, and that's it's fascinating work.
It's unbelievable. You can now turn up to a conference. You were mumbling about big data before, and you can go to a conference and someone goes, "Oh, it's big data," or whatever. You'd be like, "Yeah, that's not big."
Oh yeah, no, yeah, it's right. Yeah. Is it bigger than the genetic signatures of all life on Earth, which we don't even have completed yet? Probably not.
Who invited that guy?
Probably not. Right.
Really
it probably is not. Yeah.
Let me stand up and tell you about eating poo. Now, but it's absolutely mind-blowing because you almost start our conversation today by going, yeah, understanding genetic makeup or whatever, but then what you're saying is when you narrow it down to something like the water and what's in that water, and then you can just disappear off into these, there is so much for us to learn. Why are we not putting more effort into it?
I think we're starting to put effort into it now.
I mean most of society. I don't mean you. I know you're doing it.
I think that's just us.
Why, Kevin, what have you been doing for the last 10 years? I'm disappointed in you. Will you get on with the genetic makeup of everything?
I think partly because it just doesn't fit with our model of life on Earth. And I mean, and by the way, that model needs to change. It needs to change for a lot of reasons. But for me, there's a couple of really big revolutions, right? Like there's the Copernican revolution where you realize that the Earth is not the center. And then you have the Darwinian revolution, which is to say that the human species is not the center. But there's another one that needs to happen that says that actually the individual is not the center. There's no such thing as an individual species. That species is in interplay with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of other species, not in an abstract way, like in a real way. If the interaction is with a pathogen, it causes disease. If it's with yogurt, it causes a general sense of euphoria or what have you. But to really reframe the notion of life as the interaction between all these organisms rather than here's us and here's dogs, and here's COVID, and so on and so forth. All of these things are much more. There's a whole separate microbiome just living on our skin, which is its own other kind of disgusting conversation that we could
I've
have.
had one living on my skin for about 10 years, so we're trying to.
There's a spray. There's a spray that you can get. It's probably available
for most chemists. But I'm thinking about myself as an open ecosystem, and I'm hoping, like, through time, I will evolve to be a super being with this thing that I have that's been with me for a while.
I think everyone needs to know about this.
They said it was a fungus, but
I think like, kidding aside, like, it really it requires a reframing of what life is on Earth. Like, not to get all hand wavy about it, although I am waving my hands. It requires rethinking what's important. It's like, yes, it's important to save the polar bears and this type of fish and this type of scorpion that turns out to be really important in the ecosystem. But we need to start thinking about a kind of stewardship also of the invisible kingdom. And we are, it's like it's hard to get your head around it because it doesn't announce itself except when there's bad news.
And you can't see it.
It's easier to get your head around the last 15 months.
And why we should do something about it. What should we do to learn more? Because we're never going to. I nearly said scratch the surface and discover, because we might scratch the surface and then we'll go analyze it and then we'll find all the stuff.
I would recommend a fecal matter transplant. All I'm saying is it worked for me. I didn't know anything about any of this, and then
I ate poo, and then I got my hair back. But what else happened as a result of that?
I mean, he really simplifies.
Simple.
It's a good question. I guess one place to start looking, is something called Metasub. That's a decent intro to what's going on. METASUB. And that is, remember I told you about Chris Mason at the Weill Cornell Center for Computational Genomics. He was sequencing every station in the New York City subway. And he did that, which was fascinating, but that has now grown into a kind of global consortium that's sequencing just about everything. Subway stations all over the world, but also everything else. And so there are people in Brazil who are contributing to the database, and there are people in Japan who are contributing to it. And just by looking at Metasub and just seeing the different types of scientists, because that's also part of what's interesting. You have people like Curtis Huttenhauer at Harvard, who's he's a CS guy, he's a computer scientist, but he is crucial in this. And then you have people who are just real raw microbiologists, and there's Metasub is one place where the contributions of a very diverse set of contributors is visible. So that might be a place to start.
This is now the question I can give to the parents that ask me at school, because we go, we're doing this podcast on AI and technology, and they go, what do I tell my kids to do when they get older? Is AI coming to take all the jobs? I go, I've got an idea. Why don't you become a data scientist and study all of the metadata of the biology and unseens that have never been found, because there's infinite amount of work in the future.
Done.
The children should be playing in the dirt right now to get as diverse a skin microbiome as they can. And then in 10 or 15 years or so, they should be contributing to our understanding of what's in that dirt. That would be my advice.
I love it. And I love that you mentioned the playing in the dirt thing, because we did touch on that ages ago. But the importance of not showering as frequently, not using all the soaps as often. I've been religiously following that as a result, and find myself infinitely healthier as a result.
Yep. Yep. It's there's a correlation in that one between popularity and health. But during the pandemic,
Man at home, the only people I can annoy is
I
like.
think he's really worried about the popular side.
But it is real, and there were some there was something called the Amish Study, which was years ago, which was looking at here in the States. There's a lot more to the study than what I'm going to say here, which is again reductive. But basically, you have nonlinear increases in food allergies and allergies in general and autoimmune disorders, and that's true quite in a quite pronounced way for people who live in cities, because we've completely sterilized our lives and our environments and ourselves. And you see it also, though, even in people who are in rural environments. And the one place that you don't see it in the United States is in Amish communities, who are super healthy. And I don't know in international context how much everybody knows about the Amish, but they basically live in, I don't know what specific date, but somewhere, it's basically like 1820. Where they are. So they don't use cars, they don't use electricity. Everything is horse-drawn. They live off the land. They live lives as people did roughly 200 years ago, I guess. And they are super healthy, at least in these respects, if no others. And they're very healthy in general. And what they discovered is that what the thing that distinguishes them from people who are otherwise genetically the same as the Amish communities wasn't necessarily their diet per se or what have you. It was that the Amish don't practice hygiene in what we would call Western, so-called Western hygiene. They don't take showers every day. They don't use the same kinds of soap that we do. And as it turns out, they're working in the dirt all day. And it turns out that it's not just, being exposed to a really meaningfully diverse microbiome. It's also making sure that you don't scrub it away all the time. And it was interesting to me at the beginning of the pandemic where, everybody was being told you gotta, scrub everything. And it's like, every time we do it, I'd be like, okay, but I'm not sure this is the right idea, and that fundamentally what we want is the richest and most diverse set of microbes to be on us, inside us, around us, in our mouth, in our nose, on our skin, in our gut. And it's hard to do that in a city. And even if you live on a farm, if you eat processed food and if you are taking a shower every day, et cetera, you're still meaningfully reducing the diversity that you need to be really healthy and fully human. There's actually, I haven't fully read the study, but there was something very recently that was published about they found. I try to just bring it back to poop as frequently as possible. They found some poop from very early sapiens and sequenced what they found there, and they found that there was a massive microbial extinction event at some point in human history, which we need to, we're still learning about where, but that the gut biome of Homo sapiens long ago was radically more diverse than our own. And
extinction event. There was a time where they got hit by a pandemic and got wiped out.
It could be. It could be. Yeah. It's quite unclear. I mean, I think we can't hand wave it away like we do with the dinosaurs with the meteor, because that just doesn't work on this one. But like something wiped out the diversity of the human microbiome, and actually. Where you do find a very diverse microbiome is among indigenous peoples all over the earth, and that's predictably, it explains why there is a very, very low incidence of allergies, food allergies, autoimmune disorders among those populations.
Wow. So I'm going to open the window, turn off the air purifier, contemplate eating poo.
Yep. Yep.
2 out of 3.
I would do it in that order.
Yeah,
You want the poop eating to be last because
we'll
you
sign
you
off.
Start with that,
I'll leave.
and then just shower once.
the whole rest of
Leave
the
you
day.
to it.
Once a week. I got that down
shot.
pat. That's easy.
Right.
Can do that already. Kevin, it's
awesome.
absolutely mind-blowing.
Really informative.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk about this stuff, and thank you for the opportunity to
Thank you.
really get into it.
I got to ask the last question. I know you hate this, but where did they come up with the idea where someone sits around and one of the scientists, it would have had to have been an art student, that went, why don't we eat the poo? Or put the poo into the other gut. And then everyone would go, what? That is such a stupid idea.
To be clear, no one has asked that question except you about eating the poo, right? Like that, like you, that is actually your contribution.
Okay.
But there were...
I still don't know how it gets in there.
But yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
Hide it in the
I
chicken.
guess.
Hide it in the chicken. They'll never know.
But
That's not a result.
Let it go.
but yeah, I mean, I think it does make sense, right? You know, if your gut biome is fully depleted, how do you repopulate it? Well, there's a lot in poop, and you know, it seems like a good place to start. Actually, there's a whole interesting thing, by the way. That
it was good for you. Why would you get rid of it?
I can't remember the names of the people who were doing it, and this is probably about 5 years ago, maybe longer. But they were setting up, in the same way that we have blood banks, they were setting up sort of the first poop bank for this purpose. And there's
where was this? You don't remember? We're gonna Google
I found my
this.
next career path, I reckon. I want to go set up a poo bank.
Yeah. No,
different types.
Yeah, if you're looking for investment advice, poop banks.
And you can come and inspect the types that you want. This person was eating this.
Well, broadly, you look for the problem that you're trying to solve. And one of the interesting things is that if you're looking to get blood for a blood bank, you can use almost all the blood that you get. It's no good if it has like Hep C or something in it, but in general, you can use most of the blood. But you can only use I think at that time the number was like 8%. Like only 8% of people donating poop had poop that was healthy enough to be useful.
It's like coffee
because we've all basically ruined ourselves.
Super poo.
Yeah.
So you have like a super poo species. It comes in from like. Then there's like certain cultures that have the best poo, better than everyone else's. And they import that. It's sort of like where you get your coffee beans from. It's like the Guatemalan beans are the best. We're going to get it from the Amish. They do the best poo. We get that and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, I would definitely, if I was getting poop, I would get Amish poop.
Amish poo. Has anyone patented that name?
No, write that down. Write that down. I registered that domain.
Yes, register that domain
right this minute. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to get it.
Oh, good end to
this is
podcast.
I was going to say this one's been crap, but then that would be we're going. It translates.
It's fun.
Kevin, it's been a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself. You know,
I did. Thank you.
Just talking shit the whole time.
Oh God, never ending.
It won't end. It's going to go on all day. What do you guys? I'm going to go back later on, and we've got some guys working on a house, and they go, "How'd the podcast go this morning?" I go, it was shit. It was all about shit. I just talk shit. Here's all I do.
Yeah.
Oh well. Now we got the
editing there.
We've now said the shit word a few times, so I think we're going to have to put an explicit warning on our podcast. But that's fine. That's what it is. Kevin, thank you again. Absolutely mind blowing. Best of luck with genetically sequencing the entire universe. And next time you discover something, let us know.
All right. Very good. Take care.
Thanks
guys. Bye-bye.